Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting community, the acquisition community, and our industry partners connect, talk, and listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I am your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, and my dear friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya. How you doing today?
Hi, Will. How are you? I'm doing great, by the
way. Great. Excellent. Excellent. Well, we're at it again.
All right.
Episode 20. Episode 20.
Wow. We should celebrate these landmark episodes.
Yes, we should. We should.
Now, you and I may be the only ones celebrating it. Well, let me start off with our disclaimer, then I'll let you introduce our topic for this episode. So our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions. Here I must pause and say sometimes we do criticize, judge, or render political opinions. But we provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the public and private sectors. Over to you, Will.
All right. Well, I'm just going to soon pitch it back because you sent me an article this week that I thought was sent me a link to something to take a look at and to listen to, and I thought it was very intriguing. I'm going to put it under the title, the half-year fiscal year. Okay, let's talk about what did you hear? What did you see? What did you hear? And then let's talk about the importance and the significance of what's about to be coming the half-year fiscal year.
Yeah, so the article that you're referring to was in Federal News Network, and it was an interview that Tom Tremin had with Larry Allen. And what they were talking about was the fact that, Congress just passed another CR, well, about a week or so ago. They passed another CR that gets us to March 11th. And so what they were talking about was the impact on contracting and what really happens out there. And in short, what Larry was saying was, well, you're shrinking the year to 5.5 months, basically, because, there's that whole process that we talked about, I think it was in episode 17 or 18, where we had Chip Fulgham on, where we talked about the fact that those CRs continue to shrink the year for us. And of course, it gives us limited time to spend that money. And what Larry was saying was very true, that there is a cycle, because once you pass the budget, it isn't like money automatically drops in. It isn't like your biweekly paycheck that kind of shows up in direct deposit. Oh, no. There's a whole process you have to go through where you develop spending plans and you send them back to OMB, and then OMB comes back and authorizes the funding, and then it drops in the coffers of the agency. And then within the agency, depending on the size and complexity of the agency, they go through a similar process, right? Where the components, et cetera, have to do spending plans, all that good stuff, say how they're going to spend their money, and then they get their money allocated, yada, yada, yada. So that whole process, it can move a little faster, but generally it takes probably about 30 plus days. So instead of 6.5 months in the fiscal year, now you have 5.5 months. So whenever Congress passes something, just add 30 plus days, right? So the point was to talk about that and whether or not money gets lost, because some of our appropriations are annual and some are multi-year, and then you have some that are just authorizations of fees, et cetera, et cetera. So the only thing I didn't agree with in the article, I don't think agencies really leave money on the table. But generally speaking, what I've seen in many of the places that I work, the obligation rates are in that 98 percentile range. That's what I would say. It might be a little bit lower than that, but not significantly lower than that. And the money that's typically left on the table is not really in the contract side as much as it is on the other obligations happen. Because the tendency in our line of work, everybody thinks the world revolves around our obligations. There ain't nothing else happening. Right? Yeah. There's all contracting. No, there's payroll and travel and things like that. And the agency pays bills like anybody else. We pay for rent and that kind of stuff. All that stuff comes typically out of the annual appropriations, unless you're a fee-based organization. So my point in this is to say the government doesn't typically leave, quote, money on the table because you already know you need that money. Yep. You already have most of your programs, unless you got a brand spanking new program, you have already been working towards how are you going to fund this. And so what you're doing is playing catch up. And what happens in the contracting side, because you've been spending so much time doing all these different modifications and workarounds to be able to keep things going, right? Your people are inundated with catching up on that. And now they got to take this new appropriated funds and apply it to the catch up. So that's what really happens. So I just kind of wanted to emphasize that you don't really lose money, but there was like an underlying topic that came up in their interview that I'm gonna pull the string on. I apologize, but I'm a hard one. Key personnel. So apparently there's like some case going on, and I didn't have an opportunity to look it up, where I guess an agency, I'm just guessing, an agency, I guess, is trying to enforce the provisions of a key personnel clause. And the company filed a protest, and I guess it went to GAO, and GAO upheld the agency's actions. And it sounds like the Court of Claims is going, hang on, they've gone to the Court of Claims, and now the Court of Claims is going, hang on. That's what I interpreted out of the article. So let's talk about, you can, of course, give us your thoughts on CRs, but of course, let's talk key personnel, because that's always been a dear topic to my heart.
Well, Sarai, I think you may know, or you will soon know, that key personnels are something that I have railed against for years. I personally don't believe they're worth the paper that they're written on. And for two primary reasons. The first is we shouldn't be hiring individuals. The government should not be contracting for individual people and the characteristics of an individual person. Okay, there's a separate thing if we want to do that. That's personal services. I want you person X to come do X, Y, Y and Z. That's a thing. So we have a place for that. That's not what we do. But the second is, which is I think is really the foundation of this argument in this COFC ruling, is that it's unrealistic to believe that someone that in response to a government requirement, an organization first identifies a person, makes a commitment to them, proposes them, submits the proposal with that key personnel individual in it. The government takes its time to evaluate. The government takes its time to award. Maybe or not, it goes into protest. And then the final time where it's ready to kick off and you're ready to see that person that you've identified show up and work magic, spin straw in the goal, it may be 6, 7, 8 months later. That person has options. Okay, if that is indeed the person that can spin straw in the goal, they can spin straw in the goal in a lot of different places. Okay, and here's the kicker: if that person is still available, you probably don't want them. Okay,
you just have
because in a 6, 7, 8 month time frame, there isn't another opportunity for that individual to deploy their craft against, and we're waiting and lined up, waiting for the machinery. And I'm not saying this isn't a poke at government. I'm just saying the machinery takes the time it takes to go through the process to get an effective turn of the acquisition crank. It takes the time necessary. But to attempt to lock an individual down, especially in a tight labor market like it is now, people have options.
So I agree with you. So I'm going to push back a little bit on a couple of things you said, because I have to do that, right? Because you're the extreme guy, and I'm the person that goes.
Extreme. I have a title now.
Yeah, you're the extreme, right? You're like, hey, damn it, this way. Right? No, all kidding aside, no, I adore you, and I love your opinions, and I value what you're saying, because I agree with you. So a couple of things. First of all, I'm not for or against key personnel. My comment about key personnel clauses is that I understand that there are certain circumstances that the expertise and talent of certain positions is essential to accomplishing the work. So for example, there are like studies and analyses, or you're building an enterprise architecture, whatever it is, a certain level of capability is desperately needed. And you want to make sure that the company's bringing you that. Okay. And so that's why key personnel clauses were kind of born. It was a way of saying, I want to know that you're bringing me a person that can really do this, accomplish the work, fulfill the need. And I want to know that. And I got that. Okay. And so that's why I don't 100% oppose key personnel. My issue with key personnel is when somebody gives me this litany of positions and I go, really? Seriously? You need to know all that? Come on. Key personnel means key. Like it's like one or two people. Right. If you need the entire team to have all this, and you don't think that the company without this lockdown clause, theoretically, I'm with you, the clause is baloney, okay? But with this lockdown, then maybe you're not picking the right company. Yeah. That's what I would tell you. Okay. So that's my point on that. So one or two key personnel, I'm okay with. But what the clause is there to do is to enable you, should be there to do, let me say it that way, is to enable you to enforce the qualifications. So what the clause should be saying is you're going to give me somebody, if this person isn't available, you give me somebody that's equal to or better. Right? Somebody that meets these minimum quals or whatever the quals were of the person you gave. They're expert, they're world renowned, whatever the heck those things are, right? And then either that or better, because you can't hold a company to people. These days I'm questioning a little bit, but we are free. We are free to choose our line of work and we are free to choose who we're employed by. And nobody is held to a standard. Now, a company can give you a really nice retainer fee and say, hey, I'm going to pay you X amount to stay available.
Stay around,
the reality is, like you said, people have options. And if they're talented, they have a lot of options. I think where the issue comes up, and what I think this case is more about, is for some reason, there was a bait and switch. Because whenever I've seen the government get emotional about this, it's because they really believe the company pulled a bait and switch. The company never intended to really give you that person. They just threw that resume in there, knowing full well that you would be so enamored with it that you would just run off, award a contract to them. And now they go, oh, Bobby Joe, he's like our premier PM. He's going to go over here and blah, 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 blah. Because you're, frankly, let's face it. On government contracts is not where you're probably making your big profit margins. Think about that.
Fair. Okay? That's fair.
So I suspect that what this case is about is a little bit more of a bait and switch, and maybe the government got some evidence or information that led them to the bait and switch. But here's the thing: don't put yourself in a position to be in bait and switch.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't put you right. It's like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's like saying, Soraya, you cannot leave the federal government of the United States, even though you've been there for 40 years and your hair is gray and people are probably sick and tired of hearing from you. That's not true. We have choices. And like you said, if you're talented and if you're really that good, you got places to go and people are pursuing you.
Right. Yeah, agreed. So Soraya, I want to pull the thread a little bit on your qualifications point, because I really believe that's really probably maybe one of the seminal points in this whole issue, from a standpoint of, I fear that in the government, and again, this is based on my observation, so this is just William Randolph with his William Randolph hat on. I fear that oftentimes qualifications in government are defined by longevity.
Yep.
Okay. By experience in terms of years. And I'm of the opinion these days, and probably the last 10 to 15 years, that longevity as a correlation to effectiveness is a poor corollary. Okay. That the ability to actually do work is loosely coupled to the longevity of the time that someone has done it. I know in my experiences, and I'm sure it's been in yours, there's been times in our careers where we've been the youngest person in the room.
Yep.
Okay. There's been a lot of times that I have been the youngest person in the room. And as a result of that, the ability to use longevity as a barometer of effectiveness, useless.
So I'm with you. No, I'm with you. I 100% agree. It's not how long you've done it. It's what you've done. And sometimes those things are long, right? So sometimes a project does take 5 years or 10 years or whatever, right? Yep. So that's fair, but it's the project. It's what you did. And it's how you did it that is of value. And in today's market, I would argue that's even more so than maybe even 10 years ago because
Agreed.
of the pace of technology and the way it
Yes,
moves.
exactly. Exactly.
Everything is changing rapidly, whether it's the technology or even the business processes, because we focus so much on technology, we keep forgetting people are evolving as businesses. Technology has enabled us to evolve. And so how we do things is very different, and the steps in the process. So I would argue that it's what you've done. It isn't that Soraya, was a contracting professional for the last 40 years. It's what Soraya did in that 40 years that's important, or what Will Randolph did in those last, 35 plus, I don't remember how many years of service you retired with, because I think you're much younger than I am. You always look much younger than I do. Anyway, but it's what you did. What did you work on? Who did you work with, right? Because that's what the experience of the experience. Look, I know people have been in government for 40 years. I wouldn't talk to them about procurement in my life depended on it. Okay. Seriously, you can put a gun to my head and I'm like, not that one. So, but there are other people that have only been around for the last 10 years, and I value their opinions and their approaches. Why? Because they bring ingenuity, creativity, and talent to the equation, and they've done things that are either unique or special or different, right? And that's really, so I agree with you. And I think that's true for companies. By the way, my big argument about corporate experience and past performance. It is only an indicator of a probability that a company will do well.
Yeah, I like
Not that it guarantees it. It's a nice to know that you've done this before, but the reality is, unless you set up the circumstances to be exactly the same corporate officials with the same business process, with the same people, with the same government agency, with the same people, you're not going to get the same result. You're not. What all it is, it's a probability. It's an indicator that a company likely will do well, whether, past performance and experience. And I want to know what you did. So when the government, in fact, a lot of times where I would look at solicitations and people say, tell me what you did in the last 10 years. And I go, who cares what they did in the last 10 years? What they did in the last 5, especially in IT. What did they do in the last 5 years? Nobody cares. 10 years, you're like old news, right? You want current and recent experience. And I would argue that even in a resume as well of a person. So I agree with you on the key personnel.
So Ryan, on that point, I think there's a generational play, there's a generational facet in this as well. When you talk about resumes and individuals, I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm an older Gen Xer, close to the boomers. So some of that boomer loyalty rubbed off on some of us older Xers that you went somewhere and you put your head down, you did your job, and you stayed there until there was a serious move or progression. But your goal was to stay there. I remember when I started at NAVC back in 1995, I was like, they're gonna put me in a pine box when I leave here. I'm like, this is where I'm going to be. Okay, and I had some of that old boomer stuff, kind of that boomer mentality. Nothing wrong with it. Valued loyalty to the organization. The generations that have followed the X's, look, if you get 2 or 3 years, and we've talked about it when we were in the middle of designing intern programs for our community. We talked about, look, if you're lucky if you get them for 2 or 3 years, or that if they finish the program. If we got a year after they finished the program, we were lucky because they would take that education, take that knowledge, take that experience, and they were out.
Yes.
So I think there's a generational play in this as well, that key personnel clauses that focus on longevity almost are to the detriment of the kind of the way the workplace has evolved, that people move, they're free agents. They move around 2 or 3 years. If you see somebody that, it's almost to the point now that if you see somebody that has 7 or 8 years in a job, you're like, what's going on there?
Yeah, why'd you stay? Exactly. And it depends on the job too, right? It depends like what you were doing, right? Like what, if like you were like with a particular program or a project, you might want to consider that. But I agree with you. And look, it's about qualifications. It's about capabilities. I get it. And sometimes you do want that particular individual, but then you're right. Name it, say it,
For that.
right? But anybody who walks into a contract believing, and I would argue in this day and age, that if it took you more than, say, 90 days to award, that person's still going to be there, or that person's still available to you.
Well, interested.
Or interest. Exactly. Exactly. So what I felt was the enforceable mechanism is give me someone equal to or better. That's what I always lean on. When program office is going to be, oh, Bobby Joe's not going to be available, I go, yeah, get over that. How about we go talk to the company and see who are they offering and what are their qualifications? And by the way, just a funny little story. I have anecdotal stories always. When you're around for a long time, you accumulate little stories. Most cases where I had to go back to a company on a key personnel clause, we ended up with better personnel.
Look at there.
We ended up with better. I kid you not. Wow. Most of the time, the person that came along, the person that they would come back and say, look, this guy's not available. He left, he retired, or he went off to another project because he couldn't wait, right? You couldn't wait because you're only as good as what you did. Yeah. So a person not going to sit around twiddling thumbs. And by the way, anybody thinks that, you need another thing coming. But yeah, they would come back and sometimes they would give you people that were actually far better in terms of capability and what they could do and currentness of experience. And by the way, I want to clear a fallacy that always upsets me when I hear people go, oh, well, I want a large business because they got worldwide resources and blah, blah, blah. You always hear that. That's like the brochure. I call it the brochure language. The reality is nobody's got people in today's economy. Nobody's got people sitting on a bench waiting for a job.
There's no such animal.
Nobody, because you can't afford it. So people are working. And the difference between a large and a small company is a small company has to go out and hire the person because they really don't, unless they have a ton of projects, which they probably don't. That's why they're small. They don't have a place to park these people and let them do some work. Large businesses can do that. They can move people around. That's the real difference between large versus small. It's the capability to keep someone around because you can move them around the organization and assign them to different areas and keep them lucrative while you're waiting for the government to reach its decisions. But what I always tell people is if you're going to get emotionally wedded about who they bid, you got different set of problems because the reality is it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't. I think about this even with political appointments, by the way. With political appointments, when it takes like forever to get somebody on board, I go, really? They can't pass a clearance. So, now some of that, the political appointment is Congress, right? It's
political.
Not moving fast enough. But sometimes they get hung up in clearance processes and I go,
dude, yeah. Who vetted that person? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, I used to say that even when we were clearing personnel on contracts, or even, to clear them on board, when it was taking a long time, I would go, I don't know what the issue is, but something's wrong here. Because if the security people are coming to you with a question, answer the damn question fast. This is your job, right? This is what you're going to go do, right? And if it's that they're hung up because something isn't right, then why do I nothing against the person, but why am I waiting?
Yeah, agreed.
Why am I waiting? Right? Yeah. This is in today's market, you shouldn't have to wait.
Yeah, say yes or no.
Yeah, exactly, right? And it should be my call as the employer. Like, okay, fine, can't get to the point, bye, see ya. Right? Next. But you'd be surprised. I saw people take a year and a half to clear it. I'm like,
that's crazy. Really? That's crazy. Yeah.
So, anyway, but that's opinion. See, I told you I was
slightly opinionated. Slightly? Well, Soraya, we're at that point. It's
I knew you were going to say that. Did you notice how I like roll that in there? Because I knew.
Just when it starts getting good, right? So we have nugget time. So for our community, whichever way you're pointing your nugget for key personnel or the reactions to key personnel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So my nugget about key personnel is be wise. There is no, you can't enforce or force a company to give you a particular individual. That's just crazy. So focus on what you really need. What are the capabilities that you're looking for? What are the qualifications you're looking for? And judge on that and be realistic. If the person is sitting around waiting to work on your project, think twice.
Yeah.
Because maybe they're not that marketable or that good. I'm just being sarcastic, but honest about it.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to throw in an extra nugget. In the federal government of the United States, we work hard to make sure that we spend funds wisely.
Yeah.
So I really get very upset when I hear people go, oh, they're just going to dump money at the end of the year. That's not what really happens.
No.
We've been planning. We wrote that budget 2+ years ago, okay, and presented it, and it got moved around and it changed and it shifted, right, because of all the coordination, all that good stuff. It's not that people are sitting around just tossing money away. That's not what really happens now.
Yeah.
But we do obligate our funds because those are bills that we've been accumulating. We knew it was coming. We knew, we planned for it. So I just want to toss that one out there because I don't like it. And I'm not trying to imply that the Federal News Network article said that. It didn't. But there are folks out there, including some folks on the Hill, who say the government's dumping the money. And I'm like,
yeah.
well, that's the CR. You held me up. But no, we don't do that. We're actually planning for it, and we are trying to spend the money wisely. And there are unfunded requirements that we have lists for, so that if there is money left on the table, we can take care of these unfunded requirements that need to be done for the agency.
Yeah.
So I just want to toss that one out there.
I appreciate it. I'm gonna do a combo nugget too. So my first combo is, my first part of my combo nugget is longevity. Steer away from longevity. Okay, longevity is not the strongest. It may have some.
Us old folks don't matter.
I'm just saying. Yeah, it's funny coming from the retired guy, but steer away from the longevity stuff. Because people are going. It's even a debate now whether college degrees are even worth it. Okay, people are going and getting specialized knowledge to do specialized capability. Okay,
yeah, focus on
the thing.
Yeah,
if you can do the thing, that's the test of goodness. Not long time in the chair is a poor corollary to success. Okay, and then my second, I'm going to go back to your strategy about kind of the end of the year stuff. I want our industry partners to know that there's a part of the job inside of government, especially in acquisition shops, is to identify what I like to call the off-ramps, where money could be used if there is, and contracts and vehicles available, they're identified. It's like, okay, what are the requirements? What are the contract vehicles that can accommodate those things? Let's have them ready. So when you have a half year fiscal year, you're going to see the most savvy of us and the leaders within government, particularly in acquisition and contracting shops. They're going to be doing the things, best-in-class vehicles. You're going to see more use of those types of things. You're going to see that stuff happening. So for our industry, my nugget is for our industry partners is anticipate understanding what's going to be required to be successful in a 6-month, full year. Anticipate what's going to be required and then go find those opportunities, lean into those opportunities, partner well, build your brand, build your knowledge, and let people know you exist. And position yourself to be available for when those off-ramps may be utilized or needed at the end of the fiscal.
Can I add something to you? Because that's really good and that's really important, but companies also need to think. Target what you really want to go for. Don't just throw out at anything, because this is the time for efficiency, right? When your shrinks on you, you got to be efficient.
Highly efficient.
50 bids in, of which 40 are unqualified, doesn't help anybody. Doesn't help you as a company, doesn't help us as the government. Well, I say us because I'm out, sorry. It doesn't help the government, it doesn't help industry. The reality is focus on where your probability of success is highest and the probability of the government's success is highest. Because at the end of the day, I just have to throw this one out there to all my protesters who like to be frivolous.
Here we go.
What we do in government matters. We affect people's lives. I keep saying we because I still feel a part.
Oh yeah, you still feel
my
it.
Government, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's your government. And so these aren't, we're not just tossing money out here for, I'm going to say it, shits and giggles. It's not. This is real work and there are missions. And we need to get stuff done. And we get hung up on useless, frivolous protests. That's nuts. And by the way, anybody who's ever heard me speak about protests, I don't I don't disavow the need for protest. A protest is a legitimate process to air a grievance, especially if the government did something wrong or something went wrong with the procurement. I don't want to take that away. But
Yeah.
when it's frivolous and it's just to hang it up because I'm mad, blah, blah, well, why don't you bid on something that you're good at?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So I just want to toss that out there. I got great respect for industry, great respect for our government. Let us remember we buy goods and services for the American people, for the taxpayer, for the people who live and work in our country every single day. And these missions are important.
That's awesome. That's the best.
I'm
final
sorry,
word.
I got preachy. Okay.
That's the best final word I can think of. Awesome. And
Always
with
a
that,
pleasure. Always a pleasure.
and with that, we are out. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Bye-bye.
Take care.